mansplaining after mansplaining after mansplaining. It just like, it could not ring more true.
This is the Gospel of Musical Theater, a priestly look at some of your favorite musicals, with your hosts, Cathedral Deans and Musical Theater Queens, Nathan LaRude and Peter Elliott.
Hey, this is the Gospel of Musical Theater. I'm Peter.
I'm Nathan. We have a special guest with us today.
A special guest. We're so excited. We have our executive producer. I'm a little nervous, Nathan. I don't know about you.
Our boss is on the line. This is Arwen Myers, everybody, singer extraordinaire, communications and marketing director at Trinity Episcopal Cathedral, where I work, and I think, Arwen, if I'm reading that, a deep aficionado of the Barbie film. It was a film that you loved.
Yes,
okay.
It. Loved it.
We should probably get that out.
I've seen it 4 times now.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's enough times, but...
Well, it's been out less than a year. We haven't yet come up on its year anniversary. So 4 times in less than a year is pretty good. I think I've seen it 3 times. I watched it on a plane coming back this last weekend just to get it fresh in my mind. But I saw it at least twice when it came out in the theater. I saw it with multiple people because I just needed to... I saw it. Did you see it on opening day? Did you see it on opening day last year?
No, I saw it like the second day.
Yeah.
But it was close. It was
close.
I saw it with my best friend first, and then I saw it with all the women of Trinity second, and then I saw it with my partner, and then I watched it instead of church yesterday because I wasn't in the choir. Sorry.
You went to church with Greta Gerwig and with Margot Robbie.
I did.
It's a different kind of church, but it is a kind of church.
Yeah. I agree.
For sure.
We saw it with a day in between with Oppenheimer.
Yeah.
So we actually did the Barbenheimer thing, and we probably need to talk about that. But I guess the big question for me is this a musical?
That's the question.
That is the question. I think I'll mount a case for it being considered in the canon of film musicals, but I'll encourage pushback on some of this. I mean, in terms of structure, kind of musical structure. Although my sense, I mean, one of my critiques of Barbie is there's just way too much plot. I think there's a lot of story that's trying to be crammed into this thing. Like, I can lose the whole Will Ferrell executive, like that just, for me, that doesn't go anywhere. So that's my way of saying structurally, kind of a musical. There is a clear opening number that establishes the world and the characters, right? That opening Lizzo number that then gets kind of reprised a couple minutes later when things start to fall apart. I think it works really well as a kind of big opening, almost in the, like tradition from Fiddler on the Roof, or the ragtime opening number, or the opening number in Beauty and the Beast, right, where Belle is walking through town. So you get the whole world, and you get a sense of who our main character is and what's going on for her. So in terms of an opening number, that Lizzo number, I think, is a solid opening musical number.
When I wake up in my own pink world, I get up out of bed and wave to my homegirls. Hey, Barbie, hey, she's so cool, all dolled up, just playing chess by the pool. Come on, we got important things to do. It's her and her and me and you. And pink goes with everything. Beautiful from head to toe. I'm ready to go. You know, it's pink. Good enough to dream. We like other colors, but pink just looks so good on us. What you wearing? Dress or suit?
I have a hard time finding an I Want song for Barbie, although I think my bid for her I Want song is probably closer to Fine, which is the Indigo Girls song playing on the radio when she's driving away from Barbieland. That's a little bit of a stretch. That's a little bit of a gimmick. But that does become a little bit of a kind of a reoccurring motif, right? The kind of the icon of a particular image of the feminist movement, maybe. And then my sense is it has a strong 11 o'clock number. It's the Billie Eilish, which gets preceded through, like that little kind of motif gets kind of woven into the film, but then finally kind of reaches its culmination at kind of in the 11 o'clock slot, right, where Barbie doesn't sing it, but Billie Eilish sings it. And for my money, Billie Eilish is as good as anybody doing an 11 o'clock number in this film. So under that rubric, a strong opening number and a strong 11 o'clock number, and then a big dance piece, a couple big dance pieces. But I mean, obviously the Ken number is probably the Barbie movie's best bid for being considered among the classics of movie musicals. And that's how I want to think about it.
Yeah, for sure. I think I would agree with pretty much everything you've said. And I think what's interesting about it, if we're considering it to be a musical, is that only one of these numbers is actually sung by any of the characters. So only one of them is actually like exegetic. Right. And I think that that's very interesting.
It is interesting, yeah.
But at the same time, they're clearly attributed to, various characters or character groups. The Lizzo is the sort of company opening, like this is our world, it's the world building. Ken obviously is Ken. Push is all men everywhere. So that's the sort of like, I don't know, the jets of the sharks and jets sort of
push
thing that we're
is
doing.
Kind of, I think of all of the, obviously the Ken number is, the big Ken dance number is probably my favorite moment in the entire film. But that push number comes as a close second. It's such a specific and recognizable gag that and then when the pan shot and they're all just on the beach playing together, like everything about that moment I just think is so perfect. And clearly my sense is like that had to have happened to Greta Gerwig.
Oh,
like she has been,
yeah.
And like, did that ever happen to you? My sense is like this
Absolutely.
is a there's a whole generation of women that like recognize exactly what's going on in that moment. Yeah, it's one of the best like kind of in jokes that I think a lot of us share.
Well, I won't do anything at all. I wanna push you around. Well, I will. Well, I will. I wanna push you down. Well, I will. Well, I will. I wanna take you for granted. Yeah, I wanna take you for granted. Yeah, well, I will. Oh, but don't bowl me over. Just wait a man. Well, I kind of fell apart. Things get so crazy.
That whole sequence of, leading up to that moment, the sequence of mansplaining after mansplaining after mansplaining, it just like, it could not ring more true. So that whole arc is really just, it's so satisfying.
It's so good.
I'm not alone.
Yeah. Do you want to sit down at the couch while I explain Godfather to you? And then she's like, yeah, will you talk through the whole thing, please?
That was the one.
Yeah.
I don't know how to use Photoshop. Oh, you have to be in the layers. Just... incredible.
You live your life, a lot of your professional life, pretty close to some of those mansplainers. I know. Yeah, well, and sometimes you work for one. So I'm gonna try not to. We're gonna try not to mansplain Barbie to you on this podcast. We'll try to.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what is it specifically, or what are the 2 or 3 things that really draw you and compel you about the Barbie movie, Arwen?
Well, I think that I am the person that this movie was made for. I'm the target demographic. I am the person that lived all of these things. So there's this massive dose of nostalgia right off the bat. The color world, the sort of opening with the dolls and things, and you think back to your own, like I started with baby dolls, and then I realized that dolls could do everything I could do. And then this sort of gradual move through childhood, teenager sort of the teenage experience as a teenage girl into that kind of motherhood. I'm not a mother, but I recognized my own treatment of my mother, and that sort of switch from Barbie thinks that she's this girl's doll to Barbie actually is here for the mother. And watching that sequence again, when you can see that it's from the mother's point of view, the sequence where the little girl grows up and gets rid of her toys, gives them to Goodwill. And you realize later in the movie that it's actually not her. It's Barbie's here for her mom. And that sort of like bitter sense of loss as the teenage daughter starts to actualize, and the relationship between the mom and the daughter just starts to break down. I think we all went through that on one side or the other or both. It's a very specific dynamic, the mother-daughter dynamic. And then, all the male-female, like straight male, female dynamics throughout the movie. You're like, that's me. That's my life. So
it is. I mean, in some ways, it's a coming-of-age story, isn't it? I mean, I think the way that the film kind of got, and it might be good for our listeners who don't know the plot of the film. Not that we're going to try to rehash it here, but basically, Barbieland, the stereotypical Barbie is Margot Robbie, and she starts having these existential thoughts of death, right? Like that's kind of our first clue that not all is perfect and beautiful in Barbieland. So is sent on a quest by Weird Barbie, Kate McKinnon, to kind of find the girl who's playing with her in the real world to try to solve it. She has cellulite, she has bad breath, and she's starting to contemplate her own mortality. These are the signs of a dawning awakening. And I think the way that I first understood that was like, oh, it's an existential crisis. But I think you're right, Arwen. In some ways, it's a coming of age story, right? Like there's an innocence that is now growing up, and it's so interesting that like it is the dawning of real womanhood that kind of propels her into the real world, and then all of a sudden she has to deal with being a sexualized object, being catcalled, and then to your point, right, becomes kind of part of this mother-daughter dynamic that then in a certain way kind of gets replicated then for stereotypical Barbie. She also then, you know, as she's trying to escape this corporate headquarters, finds herself in this little kitchen on the, whatever it is, the 17th floor of the Mattel headquarters, and meets Ruth Handler, or I guess the ghost of Ruth Handler, the spirit of Ruth Handler, who's the woman who created Barbie in the 50s. So actually kind of has her own interesting, I mean, what do we want to say? Mother-daughter conversation, or I mean, part of how I read that kind of the relationship between stereotypical Barbie and Ruth Handler, it's almost a created being meeting their creator. There's a little bit of a God thing happening there.
Totally. She says that. She explicitly says that at some point, kind of toward the end of their conversation, when she's deciding whether or not she wants to, you know, go back into the doll world and you know, kind of re-engage with this like blinders up sort of innocence, or go out into the real world and be a human. She says, but you're the creator, don't you control me? And Ruth Handler says, no. No. And I just think that's such a beautiful thing.
I created you with free will. I mean, she doesn't quite use those terms, but it's an almost biblical moment. They're in this kind of like, you know, nether zone between the worlds, right? It is, you know, the created being. And she's like, yes, the creator kind of says, like, I created you to be free. I don't have an ending for you, right? And Barbie's looking for, you know, permission or blessing or something, and basically is kind of set out into the world. So it is both kind of a mother-daughter thing. I think actually what Ruth Handler says is, I named you after my own daughter. I named you Barbara. Now, I've done a little bit of reading about the relationship between Ruth Handler and Barbara Handler, and that's just as complex as every other mother-daughter relationship in the film. But there is this kind of interest. So, I mean, like theologically, it's an interesting sort of maternal reflection on the nature of a relationship with a creator that I think is both, I mean, kind of what an interesting way to think about God as a mother-daughter relationship as opposed to a father-son relationship, which in Christianity we tend to frame it as a father-son relationship. But Barbie is giving us a mother-daughter relationship between creator and created being, and then kind of asking us to think about free will and being set free in the world, growing up, if we like. So there is a way in which I think this is one of the most theologically astute films that we have considered on this podcast.
Oh, yeah.
It's playing with directly theological material here. Yeah.
Well, and I think beginning with Barbie's sort of intimations of immortality, right? That it's her awareness of her own death that kind of propels her on this journey, and the breakdown of, you know, her body. She becomes human, and then it is all about transformation of people, both the via negativa and the via positiva, like the Kens becoming fixated on patriarchy, and the Barbies all becoming submissive, and their transformation leading to other people's transformation, and then ultimately, you know, those last few frames of Barbie and Ruth meeting up become explicitly theological in my view, anyway. So yeah.
Yeah. Is there restored community at the end of the? I mean, I'm just thinking about kind of where the film ends, Barbieland, right? There is a, you know, like the Ken discovers patriarchy in the real world. He comes back to Barbieland, convinces they have these kind of, you know, awakening conversations among all the Kens, and they, you know, start riding horses and taking over man caves and relegating all the Barbies to, you know, carrying beers and serving them, and that all seems to happen very quickly, and the Barbies just, you know, they just easily accede to those notions, and the way the film presents that to us is like they're not inoculated against it, right?
Yeah,
Patriarchy. It's like smallpox. It's like colonizers coming into a world, and there's no immunization. There's no natural immunization. So they just so then, you know, existential or stereotypical Barbie, her team kind of come back and kind of redeem the Barbies, right? They kind of kidnap them, reprogram them, right? You've been brainwashed. So there's this kind of whole. So then at the end, right, the Kens fight it out. They have this kind of battle to the death while the Barbies take over the Constitution and, you know, restore the government. So it's back to the matriarchal way that it had been. And then, you know, like Barbie and Ken have this kind of really interesting moment, right? They're not, Ken has this sort of fixation on Barbie. It's not clear that it's certainly not sexualized, at least not in an obvious way. He wants to be with her. You know, he wants to be boyfriend and girlfriend, but early on in the film, he's like, I don't really know what that, you know, it's like, he's like, do you want me to spend the night? And she's like, well, what would we do? And he's like, I don't really know, you know, like
they don't have genitals.
They don't have genitals,
sorry,
right?
yeah.
So it's not really clear, like, what she's not in love with him. It's not clear that he's in love with her, but he is fixated on her.
Well, I mean, the first time that we meet him is when the voiceover narrator, who's also an interesting sort of character.
Helen
I love
Mirren.
her.
Yeah,
Helen Mirren, yeah.
the legend.
Perfect.
The goddess. The first time that we meet him, though, she says that, you know, Barbie, something like, you know, Barbie has a good day every day or something like that, but Ken only has a good day if Barbie looks at him.
Yeah.
So Ken has no identity outside of Barbie. And I think that that's, I mean, you know, that's so many of us, especially in our first relationships, this sort of loss of self. I don't know who I am without you. And so I think at the end, the fact that he has to actualize, you know, he is forced to become his own person because she's not interested in him. And I think that's kind of an interesting, you know, we all have these transformations after breakups. So even if it isn't a sort of sexualized romantic relationship, he still ascribes his own personhood to this other person.
Right.
And that isn't sustainable. That's not tenable. And I think that's what he learns, if nothing else.
Yeah. It's in some ways, I mean, and that's one of the ways in which I feel like it doesn't fit the traditional musical tropes in that there's really not a recognizable romance anywhere in this. I mean, other than, I suppose, between the Kens, which is where I mean, there's all kinds of interesting homoerotic energy there. But there's no love story. There's no traditional heteronormative love story, which I think is one of, I mean, I think that's very deliberate. I think that's one of the film's strengths, actually, because it's telling a very different story. But, you know, at the end, you know, all of the Kens and Barbies, some of them are clearly kind of beginning to pair off, right? Like I think there's a Barbie with her arm around a Ken. Some of them, so I have a lot of questions about, like, what is Barbieland now? If the Kens are no longer the accessories to Barbies, but we're also not restoring patriarchy, so the Barbies are also not going to just, you know, like, what kind of a world is this thing going to become?
It's this world. It becomes this world. I mean, you know, when they take back the Supreme Court and one of the Kens comes over and says, you know, could we maybe have one seat on the Supreme Court? And the president says, no, maybe something lower, like maybe one of the appellate courts. I mean, I think that Barbieland turns into the matriarchal version of this patriarchal society. So they've made progress, but they're not done. They're definitely not done.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe not redeemed society, but the beginnings of a different kind. The seeds are planted for a society that can. What I'm looking for is something more than just individual characters. And this is a theological concern, not a musical concern. Musicals, I think, are primarily concerned with characters, right? We want to see an individual go on a journey of transformation, and we certainly see that for both Barbie and Ken. Both of them go on a really interesting journey of transformation. Theologically, I'm always kind of looking for, you know, is this just an individual story, or is there some community story that's being told here? And because Barbie, the film is so much about Barbieland, you know, and the social political world, both of Barbieland and the real world, then it's interesting to think about, like, what kind of redemption is being offered to this world. And I think you're right. There is, you know, sort of the beginnings of a stirring of what I want to say, something that begins to look like what does equality of the sexes look like in kind of in a mirror sort of way, right? Where you're not where patriarchy isn't the thing that is the dominant culture, and we're having to push back against it, but matriarchy is actually the dominant culture. Now there's been this interesting, you know, sort of first wave. It wouldn't be feminism. What would be patriotism?
There's
like
probably
a dawning.
A word for that, right?
There's probably a word for that. Like when the Kens are sitting around in consciousness raising groups, you know, and they have this sort of dawn. Like, we're not just accessories to our Barbies. Right. We need to discover who we are as Ken. You know, that's what she says, right? It's both. It's not Barbie and Ken. It's Barbie and it's Ken. So the Kens are, you know, discovering what it means to be Ken. And yeah, they're in a world in which they're not going to get on the Supreme Court, but maybe they can start to be appellate judges, right? There's this beginning of, so like what does a world where there is genuine equality, like what is, like, and there's a piece of me, it's like because I live in such a patriarchal world, like it's hard for me to imagine the fullness of that. Although my sense is, like, the film asks us to continue to imagine, and maybe to imagine a little more robustly, what that kind of world is that we're working for, where the genders are, I mean, equal, and then begin to break down. I mean, my sense is, like, the world that we're living in right now, I think, is one where, like, we're being asked to think about gender as a construct in some really interesting ways. Now, the Barbie film doesn't really play with gender as a construct, I think.
Right. Although, I mean, it's only on the soundtrack, but the Sam Smith song is the Ken song on the soundtrack. So, like, there's I'm Just Ken, but then there's the Sam Smith song that's only on the soundtrack. And it's all about, it's the song for the Kens, and it's got all sorts of interesting like gay undertones and very funny. But they're non-binary. So it's interesting that there's this kind of representation of the voice of Ken is a non-binary voice.
It's a non-binary voice. That is interesting. Yeah, because in some ways, I mean, the world of Barbie is, I mean, that's not, at least on surface of things, that is not a place where there's any room for a mixed up, for a gender non-binary, right? Like the world of Barbie is a very binary world. There are Kens and there are Barbies, and it's really clear.
It's pink or it's blue.
Exactly, it's really clear. Yep. So my sense is like Greta Gerwig is certainly interested in investigating that world, and there are maybe a couple kind of signals that maybe this world is not as binary or not as determinative. You do have one, I think you have one trans actor playing one of the Barbies. Hari Neff is one of the Barbies. So there's a little bit of a dog whistle to this is a world that is just beginning its transformation in terms of how gender is constructed, and obviously gender is constructed in a very plasticky sort of way in Barbieland. But I think about that for our world too, because I think in some ways this is the parable about our world, right? Like, what does it mean that we're now, a couple hundred years into a sort of into the feminist project, right? And the film, I think, does kind of illustrate really interestingly, like kind of first wave, second wave, third wave feminism, and kind of the different ways of understanding what it means to be an actualized, powerful woman. I mean, I think about America Ferrera's great monologue, right? Like where she talks about like this is the impossible. And some ways I think about that as almost sort of like the manifesto of third wave feminism.
Like you have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to have money, but you can't ask for money because that's crass. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane, but if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood, but always stand out and always be grateful. But never forget that the system is rigged, so find a way to acknowledge that, but also always be grateful. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line. It's too hard, it's too contradictory, and nobody gives you a medal or says thank you. And it turns out, in fact, that not only are you doing everything wrong, but also everything is your fault. I'm just so tired of watching myself and every single other woman tie herself into knots so that people will like us.
What does that monologue do for you, Arwen? You, just because I can see your facial expression when Nathan mentioned that, it was like, I mean, it seems to me to be just a extraordinary moment of cinema that's going to last for a long time. But I'm curious about where it takes you.
Well, I think that is, and I think I don't speak only for myself, I think that's the most seen I've ever felt. That's the most accurate representation I've ever seen in any film, any media of any kind, of what it is to be a woman in the 21st century. Because we're not women in the 19th century or the 20th century, so we have many privileges that, were not afforded to the women who came before us, because there were these generations of women who came before who fought for something different. But it's still really hard. I think that we're going somewhere good, but everything she says is absolutely true. The second time that I saw this movie was with all of the Trinity women on staff, and Nathan knows it's a lot of us. It's a lot of us. And, you look down the line and every single one of us is sobbing by the middle of that monologue. I mean, it's just, there's something about it. Thinking about it now makes me emotional. I don't know what it is about being seen in that way, and knowing that people who are not women are watching this movie and finally hearing what it's like to live this cognitive dissonance, this constant dance of trying to be enough but not too much. I think about, your personal relationships, especially as a younger woman. You're constantly trying to bend to make sure that you're not hurting your partner's feelings, at least in a heterosexual relationship, while also trying to express your needs. But whenever you express your needs, generally he freaks out. And so you're both expressing your needs and trying to like apologize for them, but you can't apologize too much because, you know, it's just this endless cycle. And I think you can see it anywhere. You see it in motherhood. You see it in the corporate world. You see it in any sort of professional world, in every relationship. As you start to age, you start to lose value. The older you get, the more worthless you are until you're kind of invisible. There's just so many things that I think aren't seen unless you're living as a woman in the 21st century. I think it's hard to know what it's like. We work really hard all the time. It's very tiring.
Yeah. It was revelatory. And she delivers it so well. I mean, amazing. Just watching it again the other night, I just seeing that moment and how she has to tell that story again to the recovering Barbies, right? That becomes the gospel, really, that moves them away from being attached into embracing this new life. Like, one of the things that amazes me about this film, and Greta Gerwig, who I think is brilliant, and is it's always nodding and winking at the audience. There's this self-consciousness, at least I experienced it, that they know they're communicating with a very specific group of people. It's going to be interesting to me to see how this lasts, like what people will think about Barbie in 20 years from now and that sort of thing, because it seems to be addressing, like breaking the fourth wall almost over and over again. Like, okay, yeah, we got this fantasy world that we're presenting. It's pink and blue, etc. But now we're just going to step in front of the footlights, as it were, and give you the straight goods. We're going to talk about the world as it is now, using this construct almost like a background. And the moment when Helen Mirren, the narrator, I think after Barbie has said, something about being beautiful, you've cast the wrong person for it. Right. We just laugh out loud. Both times we've seen this, it's hysterically funny. It's right on, but I think it also reveals a bit about the project of the filmmakers, which is, what they could have done with this. When you think, make a Barbie movie, it could have been so horrible, so tone deaf to gender politics. It could have been, but they're so smart, and I think they had a real agenda that they're really wanting to push out here. Yeah, that moment is one of my favorite moments, when she starts to, we all have those moments when we're like, I'm worthless and I'm ugly and all these things, and our friends tell us, oh, no, you're not. But there's something about like maybe she's God in this. I don't know. The omniscient narrator. The omniscient narrator coming in. Yeah.
Right. It doesn't make sense to have Margot Robbie delivering these lines. Although, of course, Margot Robbie is also allowed to have all of those feelings, right? She's also a woman in the world. Right. I'm sure she does, right? She's a human being. So, yes, she's gorgeous. And also, she's allowed to feel worthless and unpretty and all of those sorts of things.
Which actually makes her almost the perfect person, because it doesn't have anything to do with anything objective.
That's right.
It's just what you feel inside is that you are so worthless in this moment, or all the time, or whatever.
It's the cognitive dissonance that America Ferrera addresses in that monologue. And Peter, you described that moment. I think this is such a good way of thinking about this moment. That's the gospel in this film, right? Which is such an interesting way of thinking about what gospel means, right? I think about like the Trinity women sitting in a row in a dark theater, having this, my sense is the way you've described it, kind of a cathartic moment.
Yeah. We also skipped work. We just left. Sorry.
I think I was on vacation. I was unaware that any of this was happening. But I'm so glad you all had that moment. Because there is a sense, because at the surface of things, that monologue is nothing like good news, right? It's all kind of bad news, right? Like, this is how hard it is. This is why we're all exhausted all the time. There's no win, right? It's just constant pressure, and it's from inside, it's from outside, and it's kind of constant cognitive dissonance and the exhaustion that is produced having that. So at one level, it's like that's not gospel. That's sin. That's like, I don't know what that is. But my sense is the way it functions in the film is it is this kind, and then it becomes the monologue that awakes all of the Barbies into a new kind of consciousness. So it actually does function like gospel does theologically, right? It is the invitation into a different way of being in the world, at least for the Barbies. And my sense is, for you all, that it functioned that way too in the theater, right? Like you had this kind of so what is that moment, right? Is it being seen? Is that Is that the power of?
So the moment for me, and Arwen, I want to hear what you think, but the moment for me is analogous to Godspell. At the Last Supper in Godspell, in the stage productions I've seen, Jesus goes around, the character who plays Jesus, Superman costume, goes around, and all of the characters have had clown paint put on their faces, and they take the clown paint off. And he holds a mirror up to them, and they see their faces as they are. It's always just hugely moving for me when that happens in Godspell, that at least the productions I've seen, maybe it doesn't happen all the time, maybe it's not in the text, I don't know. But it's like the gospel is about taking off the veneer and seeing us as we really are, which is what America Ferrera's speech does to Barbie, and then what works, in kind of a discipling kind of way with the other Barbies, and ultimately with the Kens. The illusions are stripped away. The real person is revealed, and that real person is beautiful and good and loved and that sort of thing. So, that's where it takes me.
Peter, I think you're exactly right, and I think it's not a perfect analogy. I'm not a priest. I don't know my gospel as well as someone should who's been going to church for 37
lifelong
years.
Episcopalian, which may be the.
We're not a biblical people.
We're not a biblical people. We are not. We're a perfect people.
But what it kind of puts me in mind of is the Beatitudes. Just having this moment when someone is saying, I see all the things that you are, and you are holy. Like, I see all these things that you are, I see all the ways that you are suffering, and you are enough, and you are blessed, and you are a perfect being. It is kind of that, like, feeling seen, like, down to your innermost, the sort of like you that you were when you became a spark, that like what you are deep, deep down is beautiful. And I see that you're having to do all these things, and you are beautiful. Yeah.
Well, and then the power of, I don't know, maybe it's because I know all of you and I love all of you. So thinking about all of the women that I work with in a row in a movie theater, I'm hoping you were all dressed in pink. I think I saw pictures, like Shanna was in her power pink outfit, and I just love the image of like all of my coworkers and colleagues sitting in a row having church together, right? Because we all do this for a living, right? Like we facilitate, ideally, a place, an encounter where people can have these kind of holy moments, and sometimes we also have holy, it's like you're a musician, I'm a musician, like I tear up when I'm singing. But to sit in a movie theater as a group of women who work together and are also, we all have our different kind of theological stakes in the world of church and what that means for us. But we are all paid to do help people make meaning. And to sit in a row and experience this kind of a gospel moment, right? And to all to experience something together feels important to me too, right? It's one thing to sit on on a plane and watch the film and like having the movie moves me. I'm sure it moves many people when we see it in our homes. But to be in a theater, right, and to have that kind of collective experience. I remember when I saw it in the theater, like every woman in the audience started cheering at the end of that monologue, right? It was a physical moment. I think we all sort of, even those of us, who are not, don't identify as biological women, but, but see the women in our lives, like going, like, I think for all of us, it was like, oh my God, like this is powerful. There's something so incredible to me about a community that can experience that moment together. And that's what to me feels like church or gospel, right? Or something really holy happening. Is not being alone in that experience, right? Knowing that you're not alone.
Interestingly, after that experience, like after we went to this movie, we went and we had beers and we had dinner down the street. In that, if you're not in Portland, there's a brewery on the east side that is in an old church. It's called like Steeplejack.
Oh, did you go to Steeplejack? Oh, I love that.
So it is literally an old church. So we went to Steeplejack and we had beers and food together and we talked about the movie. So it was very church.
You had communion.
It was very bonding.
You had communion.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that happened.
It was great. Sorry we skipped work, but
no,
sorry, not sorry.
No, I was gonna say that.
It sounds like that was real work.
That was your work. Yeah, that was your work that day.
Yeah.
And also your work and your rest. Right. There's a way in which that I think that's also Sabbathing in a certain kind of way. Right. Like being regrounded in the truth of your experience and. Yeah.
The thing for me that was missing from Barbie was a real critique of consumerism. Or maybe it's there. Thomas and I have been having this conversation. Like, maybe it's there. Maybe the whole thing is set up as a critique of consumerism and of the stories that the products that we are compelled, entranced to buy contain false narratives that can lead us in unhelpful ways.
I mean, I think that the most compelling case for the whole movie being about consumerism is when everything gets reversed. You know, Barbieland becomes patriarchy, the land of horses and, and like
and
Godfather.
Dojo Mojo.
And
Casa
Dojo
houses.
Mojo. Yes, exactly. So in the real world, when that happens, you know, he calls the CEO, Will Ferrell calls the company out in the real world. And they say that the Mojo Dojo Casa houses are flying off the shelves. And they're like, okay, great. You know, there is the morality goes out the window once he finds out that they're making money on this.
Right. Which I think, I mean, in some ways, it's like the film itself, you know, it's like the 14th highest grossing film of all time, right? Like, so my sense
is
it's like.
produced by Mattel.
Produced by Mattel. So my sense is like Greta Gerwig very, I mean, innocent as doves, cunning as serpents, right? Like very skillfully is positioning this thing so that she can basically do a kind of critique. I mean, nothing about, Mattel does not come off well in this film, right? I mean, like, but my sense is they get to be in on the joke because they're producing the film, and the film is basically illustrating the fact that if it's gonna make money, nobody fucking cares, right? Like we're willing to be the punching bag because they're walking home with 14 million or whatever it is, right? Like it's an untold millions of dollars
and a reboot of the Barbie
of the brand, right?
Yep. I mean, they sold tons of merchandise.
So much
around
merchandising.
This movie.
So much merchandising. Yeah.
So
the film
much.
is entirely a product. I mean, there's nothing about it that is not a product. And it is, I think to your own Thomas's argument, right? It is critiquing the productization of everything, even as it's trying to have its cake and eat it too. So I mean, obviously that's like, it's not a takedown of consumerism. It is a sort of, I mean, I suppose in certain ways, it's holding up the mirror to consumerism, taking it almost to the nth degree, right? We're going to market the hell out of this thing. We're going to make a ton of money. Some of that money, a lot of that money is going to go to Mattel and to whatever, you know, like I don't know anything about Mattel, but I'm guessing that they're not it's not the kingdom of God, shall we say. But a lot of that money is going to go to Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie and Lizzo and Billie Eilish and like, you know, they're also, I mean, whatever. But like, those are like, I don't know, like, I love that people are being seen and paid for doing really good work in a certain kind of way. So I don't know, like sure. There's a critique of consumerism, but my sense is it's a little bit using the master's tools to take down the master's house. Now, my sense is Bell Hooks said you can't do that, right? Like the master's tools will not take down the master's house. I think we mostly misquote that phrase, but that's kind of what's happening here. Is that Greta Gerwig is kind of making a bid for herself as a powerful director who she can say basically anything she wants to as long as it makes money. And by golly, she said what she wanted to, and she made a ton of money. So, like, there's a piece of it. I'm kind of in her cheering section on that one, right? Like, use Mattel to make your argument and make a fucking amazing film, and then make a ton of money. I hope that she continues to make blockbusters. I'm so interested to see where this artist is going to go.
Absolutely.
I think we have to talk about Ken. And let's come back to Barbie. Let's not end with Ken, because I think this has been one of the great problems of the film is that. I mean, Ryan Gosling, who's
so
Canadian, and Simu Liu, who's also Canadian, are both so good.
And that's a problem. I also they're so beautiful.
They're so beautiful.
And there's a way in which I feel like the film gives us permission to objectify them in a certain kind of way, right? Like there's pieces like, I think that's kind of the project, but also at the Oscars when like basically the whole Barbie sequence was a bunch of guys. It's like, wait a minute, like is this the takeaway?
Wait a minute.
Is this the takeaway from this film? Like, he's the one that wins the award. This is the scene stealing is like the Kens basically steal a film. I don't know, that sits awkwardly with me, and I don't feel comfortable about how happy I am every time Ryan Gosling is on screen. You know, like I feel like a bad feminist for liking Ken as much as I like Ken in this film. Maybe that's the whole point.
Well, I mean, I think that. Obviously, it fits into the sort of feminist model, the fact that we have to have men on our side to take down the patriarchy. Sure. It has to be a job of all of us. And toxic masculinity is very much a product of patriarchy.
Yep. Absolutely.
But also, I just love that Ryan Gosling has gone from being, this sort of stereotypical Hollywood heartthrob, like getting cast in very similar kinds of roles, to just doing whatever the fuck he wants.
Yeah,
And I think that's kind of great. The fact that this sort of leading man has transformed his career and just does the wildest stuff, and embrace the fact that he has this like dance background. It's just, I don't know. I think that there's something really delightful there, but I also agree with you that like the thing that brings me the most unbridled joy in the Barbie movie is I'm Just Ken.
Doesn't seem to matter what I do, I'm always number two. No one knows how hard I tried. I have feelings that I can't explain, driving me insane. All my life been so polite, but I'll sleep alone tonight. 'Cause I'm just kidding. Anywhere else I'd be a 10. Is it my destiny to live and die a life of blonde fragility? I'm just kidding. Where I see love, she sees a friend. What will it take for her to see the man behind the tent and fight for me?
Is that dance sequence? It's so, and my sense is like that's also the thing that brings Greta Gerwig unbridled joy. Like, I mean, clearly she loves him. She's giving him like playtime, right? Like they're just having fun. It's the most unabashedly musical moment, right? It's completely queer. It's completely like there's nothing serious about it at all. Like it's just complete fun. So at one level, like, sure, why not, right? Like, women have been objectified for thousands of years, so why not objectify a couple, like a room full of men for a few minutes?
Well, exactly. And I think that's the point. It's the Dream Ballet, right? It's from Oklahoma. It's from Carousel. It's that piece put in there. And usually it's the women twirling around, like you think of the Busby Berkeley musicals, and you show off a lot of skin.
Which they're
because you
absolutely
put them
doing.
in a pool, you know. Yeah. But they're doing it now with guys and all guys. And that is, I think, inverting the trope in a really interesting thing.
Sure. It's inverting the male gaze we're So, yeah, I'm sure that, theoreticians will have a field day with this number for generations to come.
Oh, there's so much there.
Fun.
There's so much there.
So much there. It's also a kick-ass song, right? It's a great
song.
Good.
It's so good. I love that line, am I not hot when I'm in my feelings? Like, I just think that's so great. That's so great. I think that every woman that's ever been like, hey, can we like give, couples therapy a try? Or like, it seems like you're working through a lot. Do you want to like maybe get some help? And we're just met with like absolutely not. Just felt very seen in that moment.
Yeah.
So great.
Oh, God. It is so good. It's such a satisfying moment of musical catharsis in all of the ways. Yeah. And he does walk away with that whole film. I mean, Ryan Gosling steals every scene he's in. Yeah. And I don't know if Good,
it's
good
problematic
on him.
And
it's
amazing.
Problematic and also it's one of the
and
great
joyful.
performances. So joyful.
And
so
just
joyful.
a shout out as well to Michael Cera as Alan.
Yes,
oh, God.
Speaking as an Alan myself.
I know I think every
grew up as an
every
Alan.
gay boy saw ourselves an Alan, like on the right, like we kind of want to be. And I love that they let him be in the van in the pink jumpsuit, right? Like he's a part of the deprogramming. Right. I was like, okay, that's beautiful. Like I want to be an Alan, right? Like that's my aspiration in life is to be an Alan. Michael Cera is also perfect casting for that role.
Yeah, like where did you guys see your experience in this? I'm curious because I think a lot of it is about heteronormativity. It's a very heteronormative world because that's what we're working through. So there's a lot of straight guys in this, obviously with like asterisks. But how did this land with you?
Well,
just the whole thing.
Well, Michael Cera for me. I mean, that there I had an anchor. Okay, there's a place in this world that I can relate to.
Yeah. I think about the scene where Alan is in the back of the car. I think he's escaping with the mother-daughter when the mother and daughter are leaving Barbieland, and then they realize that Alan is desperate to get out of the patriarchal world of the Kens.
Right.
And then gets into a fist fight with the Kens and wins. That
Yes.
moment. That's another place where it's like there's a lot of plot here that's not really being explored. So whatever, I don't need to unpack it all. But yeah, the Alan escaping in the pink car out of the world of patriarchy did land for me in a certain kind. I was like, right, I recognize that feeling. Right, there is something so threatening about the fur coats, the Mojo Doza Kacha house, like the girls who are serving beers to the guys, and it's so homoerotic, but also deeply violent and threatening. And it's not a safe world for Alan. And like you, Peter, that was where I was like, oh, that's me. That I recognize what I think is going on here, which is Alan is terrified of this world. Patriarchy is both deeply erotic in a certain kind of way, like all of these shirtless guys on horseback. It does something for you, and also it is not safe. Like at any moment, you're liable to get beaten up because you don't fit, right? You're not the Barbie serving the drinks, and if you try to dress up like the Barbie serving the drinks, you're going to get beat up. You're also not a Ken, and if you try to pass for a Ken, you're going to get beat up. So the Alan character did kind of resonate for me in some interesting ways. But I was also a kid that grew up playing with Barbies. So there was a way in which, a lot of the, I don't know, like I recognized a lot, like when Ken was throwing all of Barbie's clothes out the window and they would flash on the screen, right? Like I remember some of those outfits. They were all my sister's Barbies, right? But we played with Barbies together. My sister and I played with Barbies together. Like that was a piece of kind of how we, that was our fantasy life, was Barbieland. So I mean, that whole opening number, that was really where, kind of with you, Arwen, I was like, I am watching my childhood, like being played out on screen. I mean, and we also played with my mother's Barbies. So we had like, the original, like, I don't know, the original 60s Barbies, but we had 70s, 80s, and 90s. So it's like that whole trajectory. I was like, oh my God, like this is deep Barbie lore for those of us. And I was in the moment where I realized, like, I'm a Barbie nerd. Like that's a piece of pop culture that I actually know a lot about. And I didn't really realize I knew as much about it until I started watching it all play out on screen. I was like, oh my God, I'm a Barbie kid. Like I grew up on these dolls. And I mean, maybe to your point, like these dolls have shaped my sense of self and gender, and like in ways that I'm a little horrified by. But I mean, I feel like that's in some ways, like that's what this film is kind of unpacking, is how has Barbie infected us? And maybe to a certain degree, how then can Barbie empower us to move into the kind of future we want? And I feel like that's where Greta Gerwig kind of wants to leave us, is we have all been fucked up by patriarchy, consumerism, Barbie, and everything she represents. Can we use that as raw material to move into a different kind of world? And I think she's trying to say, yes, we can. And I'm on board with that project. That feels to me like the project I want. But yeah, that's such an interesting, I don't know, way of using the Barbie mythology to me. Trying to have your cake and eat it too.
Did you grow up with Barbies, Arwen?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I wasn't a huge Barbie person. I really liked stuffed animals. That was kind of my zone. But I definitely had Barbies, and I definitely played with Barbies at like sleepovers and things. I mean, we were using them to like act out Phantom of the Opera, 25,000 times. But but we were definitely playing with them. But the sort of act of I guess everybody does this in one way or another, of any gender and any eventual sexual orientation. But the sort of act of becoming yourself through these sort of, narratives that you spin. I was also an only child, so I was playing with them alone also, and really did a lot of sort of, part of what I later realized was like learning how to be a neurodivergent person, like practicing normal conversations. But, that had value as well, like seeing yourself in these dolls and kind of exploring who you will become. I don't know if this was a thing for you, Nathan, but also as you start to exit the world of imagination and enter the world of like womanhood or adulthood, there's definitely like this weird liminal space where you're still using the Barbies, but you're kind of starting to like sexualize a little bit. So there's a very weird, I don't think we talk about that period of Barbies.
And the film doesn't. I guess Weird Barbie a little bit starts to right bit. Like that. I recognize Weird Barbie. I was like, oh yeah, I recognize because like my sister and I were playing with Barbie. I'll confess on this podcast what I've never confessed publicly, which is that we were playing with Barbies. I mean, into my high school years, and kind of to your point, Arwen, it was by that point it was mostly like acting out Phantom of the Opera, right? It was not like playing Barbie, but it was
like dates and things. Like I mean, my Barbies got Barbie got real before I got real.
Yep. Nope,
if
I
you will.
recognize. There was a lot of plastic clacking together. Exactly, hitting together. Yeah. My earliest experiences of sex are probably the sounds of two plastic bodies hitting each other.
100%.
Which I think has probably fucked me up irredeemably for all kinds of things in the future. But
I do wonder, like, how many of us was that true for? Like, maybe these continued to be a tool beyond the point where we talk about it.
Yeah. Well, and the film's opening sequence kind of illustrates that, right? It's like you're playing. All of your play is very innocent. I mean, for girls, it's like playing at being mother until it's an adult woman. And even as a prepubescent kid, like, you get that the shape of Barbie means something very different than the shape of Skipper or whatever Barbie's littler sister was, or a baby doll, right?
Yeah.
Like, that is an adult. And even as a 5, 6, 7-year-old, like, I remember knowing that Barbies and Kens was a different world of play, and that was the world of play that I wanted to play in. Right?
Yeah.
It was adult people having adult storylines as I understood them as an 8-year-old.
Yeah.
But then as I understood them as a 15, 16-year-old, which is way past the expiration date on Barbies. But like there was a way in which like that was still kind of my world of comfort well into my teenage years.
I get that. Yeah. I totally get that.
Yeah.
Peter, did you ever have experience in like doll land? Was that a thing for you, or is that not such a thing for you?
I'm old, so Barbie was sort of new and coming in. By that time, my sister was well into other things like real boys rather than Kens and stuff.
Plastic
So, yeah. My young gay friends and I played with G.I. Joes and clanged
Playing body parts together.
Yeah.
And then not so plastic body parts together.
You probably had a healthier growing up in some ways without.
No.
Wait, that wasn't a purer time in the 60s and 70s before Barbie.
No. I do remember Magic Earring Ken though coming in when I was sort of adolescent, and what is this? Is he queer?
I'm intrigued.
I'm intrigued.
Magic Earring Ken and Sugar Daddy Ken.
Sugar Daddy Ken.
Some
Shout out
weird...
to Sugar Daddy Ken.
Shout out to Sugar Daddy Ken. Sugar Daddy Ken's kind of hot, actually. Like that, I didn't know about Sugar Daddy Ken, but when I saw him on screen for like the 2 seconds he was on screen, I was like, oh, hello, who's that?
Yeah,
like,
it's a very Silver Fox kind of moment.
Very Silver Fox. It's like, oh, that's a Ken I could get behind. But yeah, I think we all have our various ways of seeing our childhoods and our experience illustrated by the film.
And having gushed over Ryan Gosling, let's just gush over Margot Robbie for a little while.
Yeah.
I mean,
She is extraordinary. She's beautiful. She's sexy. She's smart. She conveys emotion authentically when it could have been just, so much plasticky. Yeah.
I mean, her character arc is utterly believable. And the fact that she is so open to new things as soon as she gets into the real world. She has all her uncomfortable stuff when she's wearing her like rollerblades and kind of, experiences this sort of toxic masculinity, patriarchy land for the first time. But the next thing that happens is she sits down on that park bench and the bus bench, and she starts to watch people having all kinds of human experiences that she's never seen before. And it all ends with her looking at this older woman beside her. She's never seen anybody that looks like this. And her first reaction is, "You are so beautiful." She looks at this woman and she cries and she tells her she's so beautiful. And this woman says, "I know." And, the fact that Margot Robbie portrays Barbie, who starts the film out, totally plastic, her transformation is fast, but it's believable. And you believe that by the time she gets to the end and she says, yes, I want this. You know how she got there. And she's all of us.
And then I think Greta Gerwig has said that she had the closing line of the film. That was really one of the first things that landed for her. It is the best closing line I think of any film
ever.
I can think of ever. It's the perfect way to end that film.
Yes.
It's a moment of triumph. It's a wink and a nod. Like everything about it is just like it is the perfect ending. It's like
I'm
it's
here
everything
to see
I
my
want.
gynecologist.
With this big grin on her face, like it's a moment of emancipation and freedom, and I have all kinds of questions about like what is the gynecologist going to discover? Like many questions about the next.
A lot of questions.
But that's all. Like that's the point, right? Like that's where we. I love that ending.
Well,
I think it's such
and that
a great
is
ending.
the ultimate. Like that's the thing that puts the bow on the fact that this is a coming of age story. This happens for every single girl. before she's ready, usually, you have to go to the gynecologist for the first time when you're a, early teenager. Not too early, but, whenever you have your period, that's when you need to start going. And that's a range, but it's pretty young for a lot of people. And I think increasingly young for girls as time has gone by, that must be quite a lot. But that is the first thing that you do as an adult, really, is you go to the gynecologist, and you have absolutely no choice, but that is your, I'm accepting my womanhood. It's the sort of bat mitzvah of all of us, Yeah. I am taking on my womanhood, and I am taking agency over my body, and let's go do this. And also I will not listen to any man complain about his prostate exam without great skepticism for the rest of my life. But, I loved that.
And that's really interesting because there's not a similar rite of passage for men around becoming an adult male, becoming a male with sexual urges. Yeah. It's just so much clearer for women. I'm not saying it's easier, far from it, I think. Yeah. But there isn't a similar. I've never thought about
not an analog.
Before.
That's true.
Right.
It's not an analog.
Yeah. And we always used to talk about it as getting your driver's license. That's not unique to men, obviously. But I think that's often kind of one of the that's probably in terms of a public right, where other people are seeing you in this way, right, and that right, there are private moments, I think, for boys, but that's different than what you're talking about, Arwen, which is having to walk into an office and say to a receptionist, I'm here to see my gynecologist, and then
go see a stranger,
and
whether or not you've had sex or not.
Yep.
Something's about to happen that is going to be very, very vulnerable and very private.
Yep.
Yes.
And for most of history has not been done with any sort of care or attention or it's kind of a brutal moment. My sense is it's historically not fun. Yeah. And I think you're right, Peter. There's not an analogous moment for boys. We don't have that same. Although, I mean, I guess maybe
the draft
locker rooms. Yeah.
Do you think maybe the draft was that at some point?
Having to take off your clothes and stand in front of an examining
board.
For in a certain generation. Yeah, maybe.
It doesn't have the characteristics of being both sexual and physical and emotional. Not both.
And public.
And public. Yeah, thank you.
And public. Yeah. Maybe I think about locker room showers. That's probably about
maybe.
it. But even that's a very that's a different. That's the experience of Alan. That's where I recognize myself as an Alan. Is when you're
terrible.
You're in the locker room with all the Kens, and they're all disrobing, and you're like, oh, fuck me. All of Ken's clothes fit me, but I don't belong. I don't belong here. Yeah. And yet in a deeper way, I think this whole world is actually for me. So
this seems fine.
This seems fine. Yeah. So you either fake it or you. Yeah. Exactly. There's a whole. Yeah. So different scripts. But yeah. No.
I love that her. I mean, we can get into the tough parts of that, but I love that she's so joyful about it. She just embraces. She has just said yes to everything, and she said yes to everything. Yes. I just love that. I love that. I don't know.
Well, and she's about to begin a new life, right? Just to keep the theological riff going here.
Mm-hmm. So is that the answer to that? I mean, I think about that Billie Eilish song, right? What was I made for? That beautiful kind of ballad, Barbie's, her existential crisis, right? What was I made for? And, in a certain way, the obvious answer to that is you were made to be played with. You're a product. You were made to be played with by little girls. Now, I think the emancipatory answer there is I don't know, but I think I was made to be human. I think I was made to feel things more deeply. And to a certain degree, I was made to see my gynecologist. I think that's the smile there. Is I may not know ultimately, what was I made for? All of us are asking that question all the time. But at least in this moment, I was made for this. This is my destiny playing out. I am here. I'm going to see my gynecologist.
I used to float, now I just fall down. I used to know, but I'm not sure now what I was made for. What was I made for? Taking a drive, I was an ideal, looked so alive. Turns out I'm not real, just something you paid for. What was I
And for the film, what she was made for was to be the main character in this extraordinary feminist tale.
Yeah.
As a character,
as a character, right?
Yeah.
So Barbie isn't just the object of play anymore. Greta Gerwig has transformed her into being the vehicle, the main character in a story.
She's almost the savior of Barbie. I mean, like, there's a way in which she's a little bit of the prophet, if you like, or the Jesus, or
She is kind of the Jesus because, I mean, she is reborn. Like, she is,
literally
it's
reborn.
not exactly resurrected, but she is reborn as a human. Yeah. She's something else now.
Yeah.
She's been transfigured.
The world has changed.
It's a transfiguration.
It's certainly an incarnational moment, right? Yeah, she is a godlike character who is becoming human and finding her deepest kind of emotional resonance and release in the experience of becoming human, which is part of the way that how I kind of want to understand Jesus, right? Is that like being human was so amazing and beautiful, you know, like is such a cool experience, or has a potential to be. Also, it's such a painful, horrible, wrenching, awful experience. All of those things, both and.
Well, it's like when she chooses it, he chose it, right? Like she has to stop and breathe and then decide. She has to think about the whole human experience and accept it. And that's, it's so powerful to say yes.
And it is her choice. I think it's so significant that it is her choice. Her maker does not send her unwillingly into the... Weird Barbie does a little bit. That's a Quest thing. And in the end, it is her choice, right? And the creator basically says, like, whatever decision you make, I trust you, right? Like, you have options here, but I'm gonna ask you to make a choice. And I think that feels really important to me, that it is a choice. That's how I want to understand Jesus too, right? I think about... There's an R.S. Thomas poem. Peter, do you know this poem? Where it's like... God is like looking at the world and it's full of pollution, and it's like it's this description of how horrible the world is, and then if the last line is the son looked to the father and said, "Let me go there," right? Like basically asking, right? Like I want that world. And I see all of the awfulness of it. That's why I want it in a certain kind of way, right? Like I feel like that's the world I want to be a part of, and that's kind of how I understand that last moment, right? Barbie choosing humanness. Because I think, to your point, Arwen, she's had that moment at the park bench, right? She's seen the other side of it, which is all the joy of that. She's seen how beautiful a woman in her 80s can be.
Yeah, which is pretty revolutionary.
Which is kind of revolutionary.
Yes.
And so beautiful. That's what we all deserve, Yeah. We are perfect from day one to day, 10,000. I don't know how many days we live. How many days do we live?
Thousands.
Let me do some quick math. Thousands of days. To the last day. We're perfect to the last, the very end. And that's not how we live all the time. We also don't say yes all the time. So I just think, this vision of a better world that she embodies, we can choose to be human. We can choose to say yes, and we can choose to change things. I think it's just so beautiful.
Yeah. It's a very powerful film. Maybe a musical. We'll let the verdict be out on that. But certainly gospel all over this film. My sense is
this film.
This is a film all about gospel.
Yeah. And it's at least a musical for like 4 minutes. So
yeah, absolutely. And I'll take those 4 minutes.
4 fabulous minutes.
4 fabulous minutes.
Fabulous.
That are part of the canon for forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. There we are.
Arwen, thank you for coming to talk with us about Barbie. I'm so glad to get to hear your perspective on this film. Peter and I could be two gay boys talking about this film, but really it's not directly a film for us. I think you're right. You are the target audience in so many ways for this film. And it's so lovely to get to see it through your eyes. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's so nice to get to talk to you guys.
It's really fun.
Yay. And thanks for being our executive producer.
You're welcome.
And keeping us out of trouble.
Thanks for being so great, you guys.
Absolutely. Absolutely. See you next time.
The Gospel of Musical Theater is a production of Trinity Episcopal Cathedral in Portland, Oregon. Join Peter and Nathan every other Friday right here in your podcast feed, and connect with us on Instagram and Twitter at gospelofmt. Learn more and support us at trinity-episcopal.org/podcasts. See you next time.